I'm Pamela LiVecchi, a lecturer from psychology.
And we're going to hopefully have a great conversation with you about feedback, giving feedback and receiving feedback, right? Receiving from students, giving feedback to students, and receiving feedback from students to help in assessments all the way around, right? How we assess our students and how they assess our courses. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen first. Okay. Please let me know if you can see that. Can you see that? Yes? Okay. So I'm going to go
Yes.
into slideshow here. Why are you seeing all of this? Hold on a second. Do you see my side over here? You do. Oh, here we go. Okay, got it. All right. So this is a collaboration between sociology and psychology. We're lecturers and we've been getting to know each other, right, since we've first been hired. So we've been trying to collaborate a lot and bring in these kinds of information to all of you, and of course, to learn from you as well. So first things first, and I know Pam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I speak for you as well when we say we're not experts in any of this. We're just going to talk to you about what has worked for us, right? Or some of the things that we use, and we're hoping that you can also share with us what you use so that we can implement it also in our courses and how we engage with students as well. So what are we going to do today? Well, identify ways to analyze our classes regarding feedback, what methods of feedback work for you as well as for students, how feedback really is a flexible ongoing process, and picking a way to implement new methods for receiving and providing feedback. So, oops, sorry. So, part of feedback is an important part of learning. We know this, right? So we help our students grow as they learn. We are encouraging our students constantly. We make ourselves available to our students, right? We're flexible with our students, but it's also important to give them feedback that they understand, right? But also encourages continued learning. And I think that's an important part of giving feedback, because many times if a person receives feedback and they see it as overly critical, it actually might stump their learning, right? They may not be motivated, they'll get demotivated, and it doesn't help the process. But it has to be understood. We just can't give feedback and just leave it out there, right? I mean, so part of it is also asking, do you understand what I'm asking you? Do you understand what you need to do next? So there's a lot that goes into it than just like, I'm just giving you feedback and I'll get it done. And that's what we want to talk about with you a little bit today. Any questions so far? We're good? Okay. I'm not good at checking the chat. So Pam, while I'm talking, if you want to check the chat, it's fine. Okay, thank you. So to be effective, it needs to be clear, purposeful, meaningful, right? And also make some connection to what the students already know. So I have put a link here, and I know this is being recorded, so they can send you the link for this article. This is an article where these researchers actually did a meta-analysis of all types of research regarding giving feedback, and they've come up with like 4 levels of feedback. We're not going to get into that right now. It's beyond the scope of this presentation, but they do talk a lot about some effective ways, right? In which feedback works, what works best, what doesn't, based on this research that they have. But the takeaway here is that it must be clear. It has to be purposeful, okay? And it should make connections to what the students are learning, and what they know and where they're going forward. And I think that's the important thing. It can't just be a blanket form of feedback. It has to be very specific. So in order for feedback to be received, right? You could give feedback, you could be perfect at giving your feedback, but if you don't do it correctly, it's not going to be received. So you have to be able to prepare your students how to receive feedback. So my question to the group now is, what are some ways that you use, right, to prepare your students to receive feedback? What are some things that you do in your courses to help students prepare for this feedback that they'll be getting? You can just raise your hand and I'll call on you. I'm trying to see who's on. If you think of any ways, Emma Shay, go ahead.
At the start of the class, when we're getting to know each other, I am very transparent about how I have designed the course and why, and how I am approaching this relationship with my students, so that they understand the intentionality and also the evidence behind how I have designed assignments, but also how I give feedback. So that's one thing I do is at the start of the semester, provide that rationale for what they can expect from me.
Thank you for that. Anyone else use a method that they use to prepare their students to receive feedback? Richard, go ahead.
It's not terribly sophisticated, but just to sort of spend some time talking about the sort of trajectory of the course, and that you're going to do. I do a lot of project-based learning, so you start off with sort of a proposal, you'll get feedback, then you'll do a little research and you'll get feedback, and then you'll start to flesh out some main points and a thesis and get some feedback, do an outline and get some feedback and things like that. So you sort of talk about it. I say it's not very sophisticated, but this is the process you're going to go through. It's like climbing up a ladder. So you're going to do one step, get some feedback, another step, get some feedback. The feedback is not going to be, we're going to try and work on one thing at a time, but it's going to be a process. And the point is not to sort of fall at any hurdle, but to get to the end of the line. So it's about where you end up. So you're explaining always that this is not, try and make it not like a zero-sum game, so that they can be discouraged by a lot of red ink, for to use a metaphor, after sort of 3 weeks. But like it's a dialectical backwards and forwards process. So try to make that plain to them. Not everyone's always listening or takes that on, but the thing with our students, I think, is repetition. And so every time there's a piece of work due, you sort of reinforce this is the process they're going through, and they're climbing a ladder, going up a set of stairs, something like that. So again, not terribly sophisticated, but the mutual reinforcing of the process.
Thank you for that, Richard. That's very good. Chloe? And I'll get back to Richard's comments in a second. Chloe?
Yes, so just like Richard and Amish said, like I tried to explain what they are supposed to do and why for the assignment, the reasoning, but also what I use is following up Gina's point on the transparent and specific. I always provide them with the grading rubric and the expectation before the assignment. I explain why there's this grading rubric and this portion, why is it important. In that way, they understand when I give them feedback based on the rubric, they would understand what they're missing.
Thank you, Chloe. Doug, do you have your hand up? I wasn't sure if you were raising your hand. Okay, Jill?
No, I'm just deep in thought, that's all.
Oh, okay.
New to me, so it's like I'm just sitting there like a sponge. Sorry about that.
No problem. Jill, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I think one of the things that I have found useful in preparing students for feedback is talking about how learning is messy, and that making mistakes is part of learning. And so they won't be penalized, right? The feedback is not a penalty. And so I have a lot of assignments that I grade on a complete incomplete basis to kind of reinforce that this is not a penalty. This is just an opportunity to learn from what you've already done and then to move forwards.
Thank you, Jill. Kathy? I can't hear you, Kathy.
That similar to what others have said, I have assignments where you have to do one thing and then use that as sort of a foundation for a subsequent assignment, and then use that as a foundation for a subsequent assignment. And so I sort of tell students at the very beginning that everybody's starting from having done 0 for this assignment, and by the end of the semester they're going to have like a formal report, and that the goal of the feedback is more just direction. It's not necessarily to be critical, it's more just the directions for the next step. And so it's very, very specific. And so in that case, I tell students, like, look, everybody's going to need the guidance. And so still work in progress in terms of getting students to not feel discouraged, but yet can use, as long as you do ABC, you're going to do perfectly on the next step. And so I feel like I have, you know, what I want them to get out, but I feel like sometimes there's a lot of, I feel like I have to do a better job at like really telling students that it's intended to get feedback. So if I say, look, you have to have these 10 points, that's normal. And so that's something that that I feel it's important to do, but I feel like I sometimes have to prepare students to know that it's okay to get the guidance.
Right. So I like all of your responses. I mean, you all have peppered here and there, right? It's almost like a feedback salad. So I'm going to call it the feedback salad, right? Because there's no magic wand, no magic pill, no magic way of doing it. You have to find, right, what works for you and what works for your students. And I always say that each class that we teach, no matter how many we teach, how many years we're teaching, the cookie cutter approach never really works, right? You have to kind of work with the characteristics and the personality of each class and your students. So I like this idea of repetition that Richard spoke about, being clear, scaffolding your assignments also helps. The rubric that Chloe spoke about. Jill, when you talked about the incomplete, complete, this is a process, it's messy. Explaining all of these things, kind of like you said too, so that they're not discouraged, to say, hey, I'm going to give you some feedback. And I'm going to need you to be able to understand. And if you don't understand it, it's okay to ask the student. If you don't understand something I'm asking you to do, please feel free to come and talk to me and I'll clarify it for you, right? And that's why sometimes I prefer verbal feedback, because you can get it and you're watching the person and you can see the glass over look, in their eye, like they're not getting it, and you can actually clarify it. So, I mean, this is really good strategies to use from the very beginning. Let the students know that they will be getting feedback on their assignments and it's to be expected, right? And it's part of the process. So for feedback to be effective, any research that you read on it, it needs to be timely. Now that means different things to different people, right? If they're learning new things, obviously right away, the feedback is important. But if it's something that they know and they're working through a process, like perhaps like these scaffolded, assignments, it can be delayed a little bit, because at the same time, we're not going to give the students all of the answers, right? We want them to kind of sit with it, let it marinate a little bit, and see if they can come up with some of their own solutions, right? To be able to address some of these things. So I always encourage my students, reread your stuff. Just so, take the time to do the assignment way before it's due, so that you could sit with it, read it, edit it, get someone else to look at it if you want to, but just don't submit it. Try to catch those mistakes, see where you can elaborate a little bit more, because this way it avoids me giving you that feedback, right? And you can take it. So that's kind of a self-guided thing. Targeted, be specific. It's important that students know why they have the grade they have, what the comment was about, right? There's nothing worse than opening a paper and seeing a B- and nothing else on it, right? Okay, so I get that I didn't get 100, right? Or an A. Why did I get this B-, right? So you have to be specific, but not too much where you're going to overwhelm the students. So this is where priority comes in, right? What is the main thing that we want them to learn? What's the main takeaway? And please, I don't mean to sound condescending. I know that you all know this. I'm just telling you what the research says, right? Okay, maintaining the self-esteem of the students is important. That's always a priority for me. I'm always doing I'm the praise person in the classroom. I give you praise and I critique you, then I give you praise again. To me, it's always about maintaining the self-esteem of the student. I think it's important, especially when we ask, even when we're doing like regular questions, right? In our courses during a regular session, and they may give the wrong answer. I tend to be like, well, that's not exactly what I was looking for. That's not quite what the answer is to that, but you know what? Let's try again. Let's think about this. So I do it in a way that the student may even chuckle about it, let them feel embarrassed, because the last thing I want to do is shut a student down, right? So maintaining that self-esteem is really, really important to me. That to me has to be the most important part of giving feedback. That's just a personal preference. But then also it provides opportunities to respond and to practice, right? And what I mean by responding to the feedback is just that, asking questions to clarify, right? And us as professors not feeling like, oh my gosh, what do you mean they don't understand? Listening to them and understanding that maybe we need to rephrase it, right? Let them respond to it. Let them tell you, oh yeah, I kind of thought about it, but I didn't include it. And then have a conversation about that. It's really about having a conversation. And the opportunity to practice, well, with your assignments, right? Your assignments are goal-oriented, they're task-oriented. Are they meeting it? What is the process that they're getting to get there? Give them that chance. You could write something like, moving forward, let's try, focus on doing something like this, right? Giving them that opportunity to do it, or having them revise the assignment. Okay. Scaffolded assignments are really good for the practice part. I don't know, maybe a lot of you use it. I use one or two. It really does provide that opportunity for students to practice and implement that feedback that you are giving to them. Okay. Why is my thing? Okay. So there are different types of feedback delivery, and Emishay, you're going to notice at the very bottom, it says video with an exclamation point. And the reason it says video with an exclamation point is because while I was attending your session yesterday, right, on building community, I was like, wow, I never even thought of that. I never even thought about doing a video, right, to give feedback. And I think it's awesome to do that. So we're adding, that was like a last minute addition right after your session. So thank you so much for that. We're always learning from one another. So I really love it. The types of feedback we can give are verbal, obviously, individual with the student, as many of us may do. We could do it in groups, depending if you're doing like group projects. Usually I like to do it with the group, invite the group to my office, or go to them if they're doing group work in the classroom, walk over to them, listen to them, and talk to them about it. And the class setting is an important one. That's when we're doing our assessments and we find, a lot of students were giving the same wrong answers, or maybe the same, and thinking about, maybe I didn't explain that very well. And then let them know, hey, most of you did great with this, but a lot of you also got confused with this. So let's take a minute now to clarify what this is. Let me explain this to you, right? So you could do it that way. Research also talks about using clicker prompts and questions, where you could put like polls, do polling, right? Just to kind of see and measure where the students are, and you can give that feedback there. The written feedback, some of us do it, some of us don't. To me, it's easier verbal. I do give written feedback, but if I find that it's going to be a lot, what I usually do, honestly, just to kind of save myself the trouble of the student not understanding what I'm writing, because when I write a lot, it gets a little sloppy. I'll ask them to come meet with me. Can we talk? Let's talk to you about this. Come meet with me. It could be over the phone. It could be on Zoom. It could be in person. I'm very flexible. But that video one, that's a really good one. So I want to ask Kathy, I see that your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, just in terms of the feedback delivery, because I feel like if I ask students, oh, come meet with me, do you feel like what's a way, or what are the strategies you take for them to meet with you, but like right away? Because in the semester is so fast paced that I feel like when I do meet with people verbally, it's so effective. But then if that's the strategy, I'm not going to be able to give feedback to everybody, because not everybody's going to meet with me right away.
Exactly.
And so then I'm doing written, and I feel like written, it's such a hard balance to be specific without being blunt. And then if you're trying to like maintain the encouragement, then it ends up being too wordy. So how do you get students to meet with you sooner rather than later?
Well, I tell them I have time right now. Can you follow me? If I'm not teaching another class, I'll tell them what time works for you, because, I do take a survey. I take a survey in all my classes to find out who's working when they're working like that. So I know most of my students are working right after school, right? So I'll tell them when's a good time to call me. You can call me, or I can call you. I'll ask them what works. But sometimes it's something quick that I could just tell them right there on the spot. I just don't want them to like leave without getting that feedback. But I tell them that they have to at least talk to me within that afternoon or the next day. Because remember, we want to be timely, especially if it's something that they have to work on. But the first thing I tell them is like, listen, this is not anything bad. I just want to clarify. I just want you to make sure, I want to make sure that you understand what I'm asking you, right? What I'm talking to you about. So remember, with me, it's always about their self-esteem. So the last thing they want to do is talk to their professor to come and talk to me. What do I have to meet with you for? You don't want them to get scared, right? So that's how I do it. But it is hard. And I'm glad that you brought up the whole semester thing, because my next question to you is, what are some challenges that you see about delivering feedback in any form? I know, Kathy, you talked about the written. I think most might agree with that. I definitely agree with your comments about you don't want to be blunt or too much and overwhelm, right? But what are some challenges you foresee or you have encountered in giving feedback or trying to give feedback because of time? Anyone? Richard, go ahead. Thank you. Richard?
Simply having them, certainly, so having them read it, having them, I don't know what that, it sounds so stupid to say, having them read and digest what you say. One thing I was going to mention in relation to the previous conversation is I have never done it before, but I know some friends of mine in Blackboard, I don't know if it's available in Brightspace, would record short messages for students. And they did that because they had read that students will much more listen to a recording of feedback than read comments. And I'm a bit of a Luddite, so I never quite worked out how to do it, so I didn't do it. But I think, I mean, feedback is one thing. It only works if it enters the student's consciousness. And so how best to deliver feedback. And I think one of the things is we all have, I think, relationships with our students, and hopefully we build trust with our students. And I think a voice is a perhaps more supportive way to deliver feedback than just digital words. So finding out ways to do that. It's simply impractical to meet with every student if you've got 30 odd students in a class and you're teaching 3 or 4, 3 classes usually, or 2. So finding a way to deliver feedback that they will listen to and is not off-putting. You just hear from students all the time that, you know, any sort of, what they want is a good grade, and any words looks like, oh, I did something wrong. And so, you know, understanding how students see feedback is really important, because some are just instantly turned off by a bad grade and any writing, or what they understand to be a bad grade. So I know that's a lot, and I'm talking quite a lot, so I'll stop there. But what's the problem? Have it be effective, having them read it, understand it.
Thank you for that, Richard. Very important. Thank you. Jill?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Richard said. I think that was a huge challenge for me for a really long time. And then I went to a very inspiring workshop by Kristen Madrazo from the English department. And she talked about how she's in dialogue with her students, but one of the first things that she does, which I have found very effective, is to ask students to summarize the research, summarize the feedback that you've given them, and make an action plan for what they're going to do next. And I've used that approach and I've found it really helpful. And then we can bring those, you know, doing things in class, using the class space to talk to students about individual questions, and then sort of having group discussions or whole class discussions, I think are really helpful.
Thank you, Jill. Go ahead, Emma Shea.
I think one challenge that I suspect might resonate with others is the way that our class sizes are increasing. And so I know that, you know, in total this semester I'll have 100 students. And in order to do, you know, really care-filled teaching, very intentional feedback, and to do it in a timely manner, it starts to feel a little bit challenging. And so that, of course, this design pushes towards an exam-based, right? Because you can do an exam, and an exam can automatically correct itself. The feedback is sort of inherent in what was wrong, and then you can deal. But so there's a challenge. There's a tension there with sort of the structural push towards larger class sizes, getting more labor out of faculty, and the reality of the time that it takes to give really thoughtful feedback on a timely manner. So I think that's one challenge that I experience.
Thank you for that, Emma Shane. That's, you know, one of the things I was thinking about. And when Pam and I were discussing this topic, we talked about that. You know, we have full-timers who may have more time to be able to dedicate to giving, you know, more feedback versus our adjuncts, right? that may not have that time, and then how would it work for them? So this idea of the video, and Jill, I'm glad you also talked about what you learned in that other workshop, because that talks about the responding, right? Having the students respond to the feedback, which ties into what Richard was saying too, like you have to receive it. You're not going to implement it if you don't receive it, but you won't implement it if you don't understand it. So having them summarize that feedback is another way of having them respond to your feedback to see, hey, did they really get it, right? And Emisha, you're right. You know, I teach 4 courses, 36 each, right? So I know what it is, and I spend a lot of time trying to give that feedback. And we do have to care for ourselves too, right? As much as we want to care for our students. So finding what works for you, right? Like I said before, there's no magic pill, there's no magic way of doing it, but just making sure that it gets through. So I'm gonna try the video thing. I'm a bit camera shy, so maybe I just record my voice, but I'm gonna try that video or message thing. And I know, Jill, you said it's very easy to do. I saw your comments. I'm going to try it because I think, I do agree that verbal, right? The spoken word is better. But going back to something that Richard said, even when students get the grade that they want, I still give feedback, right? And they'll say, oh, I don't understand what happened here. I'm like, but I commented. You know that little blue bubble thing that comes up on Blackboard when we're using Blackboard? That's my comment. I take a lot of time giving you feedback. Could you please at least read it, right? So I'll joke with them about it. Like, you need to read it, right? Go ahead. Bettina, go ahead.
Well, I've been teaching a lot of hybrid classes. So students are doing weekly discussion board assignments. And one of the requirements that I have is for them to respond to each other. So I'm interested in, what experiences others have had in getting students to respond effectively, not just to you, but to each other, so that, the responses aren't pro forma or overly critical, or evaluative. So, I'm just looking for some practical wisdom on that subject.
Okay. Does anyone want to answer that? I mean, I can offer
Well, I
what I've
do.
done. Go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
try to model it, but then there's ways of giving direction too. So saying something like, if someone's had some experience similar to this, can you add on to it? Or if someone has seen this happen in a different kind of way, can you comment here? So kind of giving explicit directions for ways of commenting and encouraging each other. Because otherwise it's just like, this is great, good post, which is nice, but it's not interesting. But I think if we give direction for it, where they're able to see what we want to see from them, some people will often jump in and do that. But no, I know what you mean though.
Right. When I was teaching online, especially during the pandemic for the discussion boards, I did require that they answer. So I actually had a rubric where I said, your answer has to be substantive, right? And it has to be collegial, right? So it can't be just like, oh, great post, thanks, or I agree, or I don't agree, right? Explain why you agree. Explain why you don't agree. Why do you like it? Why don't you like it? And then offer an example. And that's how I would grade their post on their classmate. And I think it's a good way of doing it because then it lets the person know that when the person commented on them, that they actually read their post, right? Especially when you're addressing what the person wrote. So that's how I did it. I made it like part of my rubric for their grading that they had to do it in that way. Otherwise you would get, oh, I agree. And that was it. Or I like that. And that's it, right? So you want it to be substantive. And I put collegial because you want it to be like something that the person can use. And you really get a lot of dynamic conversations like that. When I would read their comments, I'm like, wow, this is really good. Like they would go into what Pamela was saying. Oh, I experienced that before. This happened to me too. Or I think the same way. And they explain why. So that actually worked out. Does anyone else have any other suggestions for Bettina that they'd like to share? Carla, go ahead.
I was actually typing it out, but I guess I'll just say it.
Oh.
I was going to say that I also don't require them to do more than 1 or 2 replies because I found that if you require too much, then they become more superficial. Whereas if they're only doing 1 or 2 people a week at most, I think they take more time because, then it becomes more authentic, I think, rather than counting and just getting to the minimum.
Right. Thank you for that. That's true too, right? Having them, they had to comment on 2 of their classmates' posts for mine, but that's part of the rubric, right? But that's a good point too. You don't want to overwhelm them with it either. Okay. So let's go to, oops, what happened here? I'm sorry. Let me go back. I don't know why that happened. I will go back to my screen. Forgive me for that. And I lost it. Pam, here we
Do
go.
you want
Do
me
you
to do
see
it?
that?
No.
No. Okay.
Do you want me to share mine?
Yeah, share yours because I lost mine. This is why I go to my 15-year-old all the time to like help me with my tech stuff, right? Because I just don't
I'm
know.
here.
I'm like, I surprised myself that I actually know how to do PowerPoints and stuff like that and use Google Docs for the first time, right? Okay, so there's different types of feedback, just moving on till I can, I don't want to take up all the time. I know Pam has a great conversation about how we get feedback from our students, but there are different types of feedback. You have the feedback sandwich, right? That's the positive with the critique and the positive, right? You look at it like that. I personally, I fall into that category. I'm like the praise, critique, praise, right? That's me. Some of the research does say that this is not the best type of feedback to give. They feel that the critique kind of gets lost, right? With the positive praise. I don't know how you feel about that. And they say that, people remember only the first thing and the last thing. And I guess in a lot of ways that is true. But I think that if the critique is deliberate and specific, right, that they can take away from it. And the praise doesn't have to be so much, right? It could just be you got this. So don't worry about it. I know you can do it. You're able to do this. Like that kind of praise at the end. The personal is when you say things like great job, intelligent answer, things like that. Also not exactly the best to do, but if you mix all of these up, like I call them the feedback salad, it will actually work for you. Task focused is another way that we're just doing our correct, or think of what Jill said, incomplete, complete, right? When she talked about that in her assignments, whether you did it or not. Self-guided correction is the stuff that I like to think about as, giving the student a chance to like think about what they could have done, right? They already know the information. What connections could they have made? And then for those large classes, like MSJ was talking about, maybe using peer feedback could help. And I know a lot of us may actually do that for some assignments. I normally use it when the students are presenting like on their projects, and I actually give them forms to fill out. I give them like a rubric that I want them to use also, because you want to make sure that when they do give feedback to their peers, that they're doing it in a correct way, or I'll model it for them so that they know what to do, because you want them to give corrective feedback, but you want them to give effective feedback, right? So I'm kind of like rushing through this, but in your opinion, which do you think is most effective? Do you think the task focused one? I'm going to pick feedback sandwich, but that's just my bias, right? But I'm letting you know right now that the research says it's not the most effective, but it works for me. Okay, what do you think? Doug, do you have a favorite?
Well, I'm not sure. I did take a course once upon a time when it was a class participation thing with the feedback, and it was a programming class. And so there were wrong ways to solve the problem. And the professor was really big on saying, first say something nice, then let them have it. So, well, I'll admit the reason I'm here is because I don't give much feedback, and I'm wondering how the heck do I do it? So, of all of these, I would personally, I think I would go more for the task and processing focus, because being an engineer, that's the way I think. So right now I'm thinking, if I have given feedback in the past, that's probably how I did it. So the personal thing, I'm not I don't have the coach rah-rah personality. So for me, that can be a little difficult. The peer feedback, I'm looking at that and thinking, you got to get them all together and have them all look at the same thing. So that has its own logistical problems too. So I'm not there yet. Yeah, I think the task and processing focused would be more to my speed.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Thank you. Kathy?
I was in sort of thinking about the different styles, sort of like broken up like that. I feel like it depends very much if I'm doing things in person versus writing. And I think sometimes the difficulty, for example, if I do written comments, it's really through that tiny little grade center in Blackboard. And so, students are busy. Sometimes they're accessing their grades on their phones where everything's, they don't want to scroll. So I love I used to always like the sandwich approach, but just like you said, if they're scrolling and they're saying, oh, well done, but, I feel like they're not reading then what is, the guidance for the next thing. So I feel like I have a hard time in a written way to do it concisely, but to give everything, and that's just sort of like the format. I think Brightspace is a little bit different because over the summer I taught in Brightspace. I felt like it's sort of like a bigger window, so you can sort of break it up. But I feel like in person, the sandwich approach is really nice because you have the breaking of the ice, then you have the guidance, and then you're like, well, thanks for visiting. And so that is sort of like naturally that sort of sandwich way. But I feel like the difficulty with the digital way is, these grade center windows are so small that students just sort of, I feel like they miss out on the guidance and then focus just on, that first bit.
Right.
So that's sort of something in which, do you find that it's different whether you're doing it written versus in person, and which way may be more effective in person versus in a written way?
I believe that in verbally versus written is more effective because like you said, and that's what the research says too, he's going to get lost in translation, right? They're not going to, is what they read, and you're right, and they're looking at it on their phones. All they want to know is what they got, right? Sometimes they don't even care. That's why I say, listen, I take the time to write the feedback. Please just try to read it, that kind of thing, right? But you're right. So verbally, definitely the feedback sandwich, not so much in the written. So thank you for that, Kathy. And I'll get to some comments right after Emma Shea's comment. Go ahead.
For me, I have found that it's often even helpful for me to reflect on my enjoyment of the process. It's actually kind of dreadful to write out like deep feedback in like Blackboard. I'm just writing. It takes so much time, and and I want to do it well. I want to point to like the specific things that they did really well. I want to point to the specific things that they could expand on in their next version. And I tell them I'll be looking for that in the next version so they know how it matters and what it adds. But I found it just takes so much time. So that's what happened. I was doing this so much. And then I thought, oh, what if I just record something and I send it to them and then they can write to it. I see who's seen it. And so that added some enjoyment for me too. So I think it can be helpful to kind of ask ourselves what we enjoy in the process, because there's a good chance that also improves the experience for the student.
Thank you so much for that, Emma Shea. Thank you. Again, you're selling me on this video and recording thing. I really do like it. So I do have a couple of other slides, but I want to be fair and respect my colleagues' time. So we're splitting the time. But I just want to acknowledge the comments that are in the chat. And, Jill brings up a really good point. And she says that, different strategies at different points of the process. And that's 100%, what, I'm sure we all do, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. So Jill, thank you for that. And as you can see in the chat, a lot of you, the people who are here actually agree with your comments. So thank you for sharing that. So thank you for your time. I'm sorry that I was long-winded. I had some examples of how I give feedback like in bullet form, but I'm going to pass it over to Pam so that I'm respectful of her time in her presentation. Thank you for your time and for listening.
Thanks. And maybe we can even go back. And just quick, Doug, too, in class, I got to tell you, when I do give short feedback, I don't sandwich it around a bunch of encouraging thing necessarily. I just kindly say directly what I want them to do more or less of, and kind of just like leave it at that. So I don't know if that's the best way, but I do find that to be more effective than the written stuff anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to say I learned from doing this with Yolanda so far that I was definitely guilty of writing on people's papers, great, and then that's nothing else, not why it was great. So I'm going to change that now. Okay, so this is a little bit different. This is about us receiving feedback from our students. This is interesting to me. I'm not someone who necessarily ever has imposter syndrome, maybe because social identities or personality, or maybe I just have a lack of self-awareness. But what I do get at different points in the semester is this jolt of fear that the class is not going right. So kind of like, uh-oh, actually, are they even learning anything right now, or are they miserable? Because I personally really enjoyed college. I started a community college, I went to a state school, and then obviously graduate school, and I didn't love all of it, but overall, I really enjoyed it. And so I really want students to enjoy it. So when it seems like they're not, it bothers me. And so this is about how we can receive information from our students about our classes. So first to point out, I think it's necessary to acknowledge that we already have these student evaluations. As we all know, they come at the end of every semester. Not every student fills them out. Despite me giving time in multiple classes in class, I still don't even get close to 90% response rates. That's a whole other, I don't know, a mystery. Maybe we could talk about it some other time. But for the students who do respond, these evaluations really are about like student satisfaction more than student learning, which is unfortunate because, as we all know, we use them for promotion. Like these are like a tangible, real thing for us, these student evaluations. And they definitely do yield some interesting information, but it's not enough to say, you know, this is the feedback that I get from students, so we can stop there. They also come after the semester is over. So like the ship has sailed by the time we're reading these comments. And also I wanted to say, please feel free to chime in at any time while I'm speaking, whatever you want. So there is some research about the kind of feedback that we can get from students. So they had surveyed some professors, and these were some things that they were looking at that they found important to them. So the timing of it, obviously these formal ones are not really timely in a useful way for us for that class. How useful we really think it is. Are they asking the kinds of questions that we would want to ask? Can we benefit from this information that they're giving to us? And what is kind of the emotional reaction to it? I think we can all identify with reading a comment on an evaluation and being like, oh, yikes, or, oh, that's nice, and whatever range in the middle of that. It is a kind of an emotional experience to be evaluated by the people who we're standing in front of. But most of the professors here preferred informal feedback, which makes sense because this is where we have some control and we can be flexible and creative and get the kind of information that we want specific to a class. So these are some ideas of some areas of courses that we might be thinking about when we're curious about how students are responding to them. So the grading and evaluation is like the kinds of things that are getting graded and also how we're grading it, the ratio of the grades and how weighted they are, the content delivery. So are we just coming into class and giving an information there? What's put on Brightspace? Is information coming through readings and video or other forms, etc.? Are the students actually learning? So are they gathering the information that we're hoping that they gather? What's the actual content of the curriculum? So they come into a class with an expectation of this is the title of the class, but what are we actually delivering inside of the class? We all focus on different things. And then what's the actual classroom experience? So how do people feel when they're inside of the room? Do they feel like this class is for them? Is it speaking to them? Do they belong there? Do they fit in? Is this a place where they can succeed? So,
Question, ma'am?
yeah.
Yeah, what if I don't have a classroom? All my classes I teach online. So I don't really have much of a classroom experience.
But you do though.
Well,
So
not in the formal, not in the traditional sense, I suppose.
yeah, no, not in the traditional sense. So the way students feel literally as they log into your class and as they look around and as they read messages from you, when they look at your content, when they see what their peers are doing, there's definitely a way that we can feel a part of or not, even of like an online experience. So
Okay.
is information that the professor is posting, does it seem like it's for me? Is he thinking of me when this is, you know, being put together? There is like still like a feel, I think. I don't know what other people think.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think I get what you're saying. It's more for the individual student themselves instead of an individual in a classroom experiencing the same thing. So, okay, I get it. Okay, fair enough.
Okay, so here's some ideas. We got grading, content delivery, learning, curriculum, class experience. So I'm going to ask you to do now, and this is not exhaustive here either, by the way. But what I want to ask you to do now is to do a bit of an exercise. This is, I would like for you to imagine if you had the ability to get perfectly honest information from your students. So you were getting the full truth out of them. What would you want to know from them and what would you be asking? So regarding the content areas, what question would you have for them? Would it be a question about your course's curriculum, about the way you're delivering the information? If you could get, there's no filter from them, if you could zing in and get exactly what they are thinking and how they feel, what would you want to know and about what? If you could drop it in the Padlet, and then I'll share the Padlet. It's in the chat right now. And you could also be thinking just of any question you've always had in the back of your mind in general as you're standing in front of the room. Do you think I'm funny? Anything else you're wondering from the students? Oh, I see some stuff. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are you thinking as you see these? So everyone can see the Padlet. Do you see commonalities here? Can you resonate with a bunch of these? Because I know I can. I am also curious about are the readings sufficiently challenging while being accessible and interesting? I really, because when we say, is this challenging enough? They'll all be like, yeah, they don't want anything harder, right? So that's something I wish I could get an honest answer about that too. Thank you. Does anyone want to comment on these? This is interesting.
Yes, may I may add something? So what sometimes I do is the third or fourth week, I give them 3 questions. Usually I ask about the readings, about my teaching style, if they want me to improve something, or maybe I do have accent and I'm aware of that. And sometimes maybe I say words that they don't quite understand. I ask, do they understand how I present the material, and what else they would like to incorporate? Maybe more videos, short readings or different readings. I leave them that would be completely without names, and I leave the classroom. I give about 10 minutes, and then somebody will collect and drop them on the desk, and then I go through them in the office, and then I decide what I need to improve. And I found that very interesting, because students usually say, maybe the readings are boring, and then I know that there is something with the readings, and then I try to incorporate different readings that are a little bit easier to digest. Or they would say more videos on that topic. Mm-hmm. Or if I tend to rush through the material to cover during a class period, then they said, maybe slow down a little bit. So then I get that feedback early in the semester. So then I know how to adjust. Of course, some students will say no readings. we know that that's not possible. But then I tend to do that towards the middle of the semester. So then I ask the question a little bit different to see if there have been some improvements, if they have noticed, and if there is anything that they want me to change for the rest of the semester. So that is it's a great feedback for me, and it works well with the students. I think it's a way to understand what they want and how they feel overall in the classroom.
Thank you. And I'm glad you brought up timing too. That's something that I want to think about. But that's a cool way to do it. Okay. So there are different forms of feedback that we can get. And so remember, because this is informal, like this is up to us. We can do this however we want. So the one way is anonymous. So what you just said, like writing things down on a piece of paper and handing in, I think that's kind of my preferred way inside of a classroom. It's also what I literally just did here in Padlet. So like Doug or anyone else teaching online, it's free. You can make one, you can give the link, and you can say, drop in how this is working for you, what's working for you, what's working less, what remains confusing, what's the hardest part of this, what do you think is the most beneficial to you? Is there something you'd want more of from me or less of? And they could drop it in there. Now in that way, although it's individual, everyone else is also seeing it because it's on a Padlet. I've definitely done the write down on a piece of paper and hand it to me, and then come back the next class and kind of summarized what I've read. There's something to individual feedback versus group feedback, because individually the person really is just thinking about themselves. Like, I don't know what else going on with them, but I feel confused. Or they might seem like they're really enjoying it, but I'm not. Or they seem to be into it, but this isn't relevant to my life. Versus doing it in a group, which is also interesting though, because you get different kinds of information. So when I've had students get in small groups and say, I want you to discuss with a small group how this class is working for you, we get different kinds of information, because maybe it's kind of like, you know what, now that I hear it, those three actually do like the activities. Maybe that's a me thing, but none of us really like the way the grading is happening. And so you get different kinds of information out of it, because they're not just thinking about me, they're thinking about us. That can also happen online. That can happen in Brightspace through small groups, and then the groups talk to each other and then share some information. I think this is good. Also, I think Sarah mentioned during Carla's like hard and soft skills, there is something really important about being able to advocate for what you need and what you want with other people. So in the classroom, being able to discuss how is this working for us and how we communicate to the teacher is, I think, an important thing to learn how to do. So this could be written, but also discussion. I've done it both ways. I've had them write things down. I've had them do small groups and then talk as a large class. Whether or not that works depends very much on the trust that exists. In simple language, the vibe of the classroom. Do they trust us to take the feedback? So I explicitly say things like, listen, guys, I've been doing this for a while. I'm double your age. I've actually personally worked very hard and getting good at taking feedback. So I'm welcoming you to be honest with me, and it's absolutely okay. So I say that pretty directly. So giving them the invitation to be honest about how they're feeling, I think is important. Because they don't know me. I'm still a stranger, and I'm also grading them. So I think it's important to do my best to set the stage where I'm open to it. So I want to do two more short things, and then we're actually going to do a little analysis together of some classrooms. But first, before I talk about timing, I wanted to bring this up. This is something from group dynamics that I think is very relevant to the classroom. So groups develop similarly in terms of stages, and not every group goes through every stage or in the same way. There are a lot of variables that impact this, but there are a couple things that I want to draw attention to. The one is that when classes are first forming, we are literally in the forming stage. This is like the first week or so of the semester. This is when students don't know what's expected of them. There are no norms yet that exist, and they don't have established roles in the room yet. And so we're playing a very important role at that time, because we're really setting the tone. And so Emma Shea talked too about creating community agreements, and we can collectively create the tone. But this is happening very early on, because just as human beings socially, we're craving clarity in social situations. And this happens early, and it's weighted pretty heavily. What happens early on plays a big role in how things persist the entire time. What happens after we've gathered some information about expectations is this is the time where you hear some people say like, oh, the students are testing me. So they're starting to come in late, they're handing in things late, they're not doing what I want them to do, or maybe they're taking risks in the classroom, like students are trying to express opinions, or maybe they're trying out challenging you or giving an alternative idea. What happens during this stage is actually really, really important, because what the function of that is that people are beginning to settle into what are the norms of this room actually going to be. And I say that because once norms fit in a group, and this is in a classroom, in a home, in a workplace, once norms are established, they're really hard to change. So if we were going to intervene to change course, we have to be thinking about timing, because it's hard once we're cruising along to change course at a certain point. So that being said, I'm glad that this comment about, at what point in time do we ask about readings and things, we can conceptualize gaining feedback at different points in the semester for different reasons, even like Jill said, in terms of feedback for students. Early on, we're thinking about what are their expectations for this class, what are their expectations for each other, and what are our expectations of them. And I think it's really helpful to be clear about this. And if they're going to be able to be flexible, still finding a way to work this out sooner rather than later, so that we can begin to settle in and cruise along. The middle part is the kind of, is this working? And this is where, when I have some examples here, we can think together about when the best time to intervene would be. This is like, are we actually learning? Are you enjoying this? Do you feel comfortable here? Is this a safe place for you to challenge ideas or to challenge yourself or interact with classmates? And then the end part is really just like, how do you think this worked for you? The one other comment I want to make about this here, though, is early on, we play one of the biggest roles, and maybe the loudest voice in the room plays the biggest role, because we're kind of like a point person for the whole class. What you're looking for, I think, in terms of health of a group, is that as it goes on, everyone's kind of equally relating to each other. So this is when you see students commenting to each other, kind of spontaneously having conversations amongst themselves about the work without looking to us as the point person. That's like a tip to me when that happens in the classroom, that I think something healthy has taken place. So it's not like one comment and then they look at me, one comment and then they look at me. It's one comment, they look at each other, and they're able to discuss the work together, is like a kind of an indication of health, I think. Before we look at the examples that I want to give, does anyone want to like say anything or comments? And we'll have time. Okay, so we're going to start with our first example. This is, I'm going to call the class that I couldn't read. This is a class that I had last semester. I had them at 9:25 in the morning. They were made up of mostly, I think, sophomores and juniors. And they were really, really quiet. So this was a full class. It was 36 students. I walked into the room and it was silence. And they were quiet the entire time I was teaching, and it was full but quiet. I remember one time I even walked in, I was like, should I play music at the beginning? And smiled, and like people didn't even laugh. I was like, it was just like so quiet. And so my projection onto that is like, they were being kind, like they're smiling at me, but like they might think, oh, this is a nice lady, but this class really sucks. Like, this is boring. This is not what I thought it was going to be. I don't like this. I will give you the information that when I put them into small groups, they would talk to each other. It seemed pretty comfortably. And then when I get to the point, like, okay, so what did everyone's group discuss? Some groups with outgoing people will be like, oh, I'll tell you what we talked about. But a lot of groups went right back down to silence again, and we were like kind of quiet and didn't want to share. And this was concerning for me. I don't know if I was projecting onto it or what else. So I'm going to pause here and say, I'm going to put us back in time. We're at the 10th week of class. I've worked really hard at hoping to make everybody comfortable. I've tried activities. We do activities almost every single class, and they're still just kind of like super subdued. So I want to ask us together if we can do a little analysis. What kinds of things would you be wondering? What kinds of ideas do you have about it? How might you be reacting to a class like that? And then I'll finish the story out with telling you like what I did and what happened. Not that it's a perfect example, but just telling you what happened. Has anyone seen a class like that, or was that just, was I putting them into a coma? Okay. How do you feel when you get a quiet class? Are you like, good, they're not noisy? Or are you like, do they hate me?
Well, I had the opposite experience. This is when I taught high school math.
Oh.
Had 26 sophomores in the class. Only 2 of them cared about what the heck was going on in class. So I had I talked to those 2 students for the whole year, pretty much the whole year. I even went so far as at the beginning of the chapter, I gave them the test for the chapter. And I filled out the test as we went through the chapter. There were only 2 people that turned in the test. So the only thing I can think of in your case is that when you said 9:30 in the morning, I'm going, damn, that's way too early. So most of them are probably still asleep. At least, well, see, I teach a lot of firefighters in my 2 classes, and they can get off shift at midnight. I've got an email from them at 1:00 in the morning. Granted, I don't answer it then, but they send it at 1:00 in the morning because that's when they're awake. So that could be my guess anyway, that they were part of it. Well, yeah, I'll leave it at that. They were asleep.
Well, the fact that you taught high school math is, well, you're a saint. Jill?
Yeah, I think it's not uncommon to experience this, and I experience it more since the pandemic. And I think that having students not having in-person classes at a sort of a formative time in their lives sort of made it more difficult for them to sometimes interact with other students or interact with the professor in the class. So I have experienced that kind of thing post-pandemic. And I think it was particularly noticeable to me right after the pandemic. I do, yeah, I totally agree. Time of day is a huge thing. I think the first time I actually taught a college course was in the evening and students were tired, and I ended up bringing in chocolate. That was the only way that I could get to increase the energy level in the room. Yeah, but I think, and what I would do, I would ask students, I noticed that you're not comfortable sharing in class. Can you tell me why? And then I'd work on that. It's really discouraging.
Thank you. I'm seeing some good stuff in the chat. Bettina?
Well, I know that I can certainly relate to the situation at any time of day. I think one of the first questions I have for myself in that situation is, why don't they trust me? It has a lot to do, I think, with trust. And then another thought that I often have is, is the material either too complicated, or am I asking too much of the students? And then in analyzing the situation, I look to their written work, and I look to see whether what they're doing in their writing, because my classes always involve a lot of writing, is that consistent with this kind of detachment or disengagement, or are different things happening in different aspects of the course?
I appreciate that. So that's interesting. I don't know that I've ever thought about cross-checking and really including that. So do they seem as engaged in their writing? That's interesting. Thank you. And thank you for all the comments in the chat. These are cool. I'll tell you, so I did, because I have a hard time, I think, with silence. Maybe this is a personal problem. And so I, even early on, was like, hey, you guys are kind of quiet. What do you think about that? And someone, this is like the second week, was like, we all, actually, I had them get in small groups. They came out of the small groups and then said, we don't want to bother anybody with what we're saying, and we don't want to take up too much space. And I said, geez, I really don't feel like that's the case. You all have valuable things to say. I really hyped it up, but like nothing changed. So 10 weeks on, still silence. Pam's coming in, doing like a dance. Basically, they're still quiet. I had them get into small groups and I said, could we all think about what's working for this class? What do you like and not like? And they had gotten in small groups so much that they were very comfortable with each other. This time they came out with like gripe lists, like this we like, this we don't like. This first paper was too confusing. You need to answer emails more. So it was a little tough in the front of the room, but they gave some things they did like too. And it was the 10th week, and we had a little bit of time to correct some of that or talk about it. I was able to kind of explain why I do some things the way that I do, and it was a bit of a clearing of the air type of thing. I also, with that class, a couple weeks later, had them put together like a time capsule type of thing. I said, for the next class, can you give suggestions for how you want me to do the next class next semester and what you would like to tell the other group? And they all wrote them down as a group too. We shared them in the room. And this one was like a little bit more lighthearted, and I gathered it, and I still have it in an envelope. I'm going to bring it in this semester and share. But one interesting I do want to say though, because it surprised me on those formal student evaluations, there were a bunch of comments of people saying that they appreciated that I seemed patient and that I never got mad at them and that I was respectful and never forced anyone to talk. And I think that was relevant in this class because it was psychological disorders and distress, formerly known as abnormal. And so I think the content was very personal. And honestly, I'm saying that because it surprised me. I was shocked. So I was getting ready to look at the evaluations and see what they had told me in class. And instead it was a bunch of, actually, we felt safe there, which was not what I had projected onto them. It was just an interesting thing to me. Okay, let's do at least one more. We're gonna do, this was a little different. This is the class that fell flat. This is a class I had, it was a hybrid, so they were half online, half in school. It was whatever is that 4:20 hour, 4:25, whenever that begins. They were slightly older because they were seniors. So we had students who were working, whereas my 9:25 a.m. students, they might be working in the evening, but not before class mostly. Some of these students were coming from work to my class. This class was tough for me because I'm used to my seniors coming in and they kind of like know what they're doing. They read you, they see what you want, and they kind of get with the program. And this class wasn't doing that. So I had a bunch of students coming in late, a bunch of students not showing up at all. And we were only meeting one day a week in person. Students were not handing in things online. And I was getting agitated. And so I'm going to pause there. This is so let's say imagine we're in the 4th week in, we're at a month in. I'm noticing that people are not doing what they're supposed to do. The vibe in the class was not great. They didn't seem to be really enjoying themselves when they were there. So let's pause again. What are some reactions you have to that scenario? What are some things that you'd be curious about? What would you want to know from them?
Okay, I'll bite. One of the things that just crossed my mind was, is there something going on in their personal life that is affecting their school life? I've had a couple instances over the past couple of years where I had one young lady, she must have taken about 8 weeks off. And around week 12 or 11 or 12, she reaches out to me and she says, is there anything I can do? And I says, well, if you do this, this, and this, you can pass the course. And sure enough, she did it. And she explained that she had her mother wasn't feeling well. There was a possibility of being evicted. So all this stuff. And I'm going, no, you don't need my course at that point. Go do your other stuff. But at least she came back to me and explained what the heck was going on. So, oh, hey, I'm going to give you a break. No problem there. So I would want to know, well, it's a delicate situation, but to know what's going on in their personal lives sometimes helps with that, not doing stuff.
Thank you. Emma Shea?
First, I really love what you just said, Doug, about recognizing that our students have really full lives and that's also showing up in the room. And I often like to think about, what grades mean. And grades are an indication of what we want our students to be doing. So you give a grade to something that you want to happen. I've heard someone explain it like that, and I thought, oh, that's a really lovely way of thinking about it. So for me, I let students know, my understanding of deep learning and like transformative learning experiences that they happen through dialogue and encounter. And for that, I really show by how I grade and where points go that these times together is where learning will happen. And so being able to kind of make that clear, and then also that's the design of the course, that like everyday work builds up into the full grade, so that then students know, oh, I'm supposed, like, I have to be here because that's how learning happens. So it's the grading scheme that also conveys that. If sometimes there are designs where it's if it's an exam, that sort of indicates to students, I don't have to show up, I just have to take an exam at some point. Um, and it's incidental. No one intends to do that, but I think that's what it can convey if we think about what grades convey. Grades convey like what we want students to do. So that's been helpful for me to think about in terms of design and how that might affect how students show up and the decisions that they make.
I appreciate that. That reminds me of the comment that's been made at some point that a budget is actually a moral document because it tells you what you care about. And so in that way, it reminds me of this, like where your points go shows you what you value there. Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, I think Emma Shea said, I think that's all great, but I think the question I would want to know for the students is, what are your experiences across all their other classes and the expectations? What we ask of our students is often wildly different across different majors, types of classes, things like that. I know tons of students who take classes where they're not expected necessarily to turn up, not expected to have done the reading, not expected to engage very much in the class. And I think that, if we're going to produce exactly the types of students that will listen to Emma Shea's point there, we actually need to have some sense of that they're all having the same experiences across their classes. And as sad as it may seem to say, they aren't really in that regard. So when I've sort of had classes like that or heard about classes like that, it's often that they're not being bad students, that they're sort of poorly trained, if that's the right way to put it, or their sort of experiences have led them to believe that this is an okay set of behaviors for students, blah, blah, blah. So I think what I would like to know is what have their experiences and expectations been prior to that. They may be doing what they think they're supposed to do.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that too. And I'm curious, I wish, and this is why I appreciate some of these opportunities for different departments to come together. I'm curious, like, what does go on in other classes? Like how much reading takes place, how much writing? I'm curious about that, just to see what is the difference between what we are expecting from everybody. Bettina?
Yeah, I think we tend to forget that students are not as efficient and as organized as we might be, or we think we are. So even though a syllabus may very plainly spell out what the grade ratios are for different things, like attendance and lateness and all of that, it's worth stopping periodically during the semester, either in class or in an announcement on Blackboard or Brightspace, just reminding everyone of how the grading happens and how the evaluation happens. So students who maybe forget that attendance counts and class participation counts need to be reminded of that, because they may just be very focused on getting assignments in on time and getting a grade. And sometimes, again, in a hybrid class, not submitting discussion boards can really be the difference between an A and a C. I've seen it happen.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. And I'll tell you just what happened in this class, and then I'll stop. I won't do the last example, so we have time to chat a little bit before we finish. In this class, and it's funny that they're both here, I actually was pretty frustrated. And so I was complaining to Emma Shea and Carla, and they said, oh, let's chat and think it through. And I don't remember what we actually talked about in that, but I remember I came from that going, I need to talk to the class. So I had sent them an email a day or two ahead of time and said, hey, next time we come to class, be there on time because we're talking about how the class is going and I want to hear your thoughts. And more people did come in and on time. And maybe because they're older, because they're also working different jobs, I think they were able to handle more directness. So I came in a very kind of transparent way and I said, I'm frustrated. This isn't looking the way I had wanted it to look. And I told them why. I said things are coming in late. A lot of you aren't showing up. Some of you are showing up late. I don't know why, and this isn't the way I want it to go. I'd like to hear from you what's going on. And they were able to like individually, and they all had very specific, because I come right from work and honestly, I'm not thinking by the time I get here. Or another person was like, truly like the way this pans out, like I thought hybrid meant something else and I didn't know that you wanted this stuff by the end of the week. I can't do that. And someone else was like, I just expect everything to be on Blackboard. So you tell us in class and then I look on Blackboard and it's not there. And that was actually super productive because they were all comfortable speaking. As people were honest, people were also able to be honest and agree. And I was able to, this was earlier on, this is about like the 4th week, I was able to modify some things. So I changed some hybrid due dates from Thursday to Saturday. And they're older. See, younger students I've heard say to me, can you have things due by Friday? I don't want to think about this on the weekend. But that's a younger person's mentality. So people who are a little older and need more flexibility need more space to do that. And then other things I didn't budge on. I said, this is what you need to do. So, and this is where I'm going to put it. So you were all clear on how I'm going to do it. And they were like, okay. Now that class didn't get to 100%. I wasn't like, what a miracle. It's a success story, but it got significantly better. There was more engagement. There was more stuff coming in on time. That's not necessarily an example of what to do. It's just like an idea of something that happened. So I actually want to finish there and give a little bit of space for us to think as a group, just on some whatever's rolling around in our minds about how we're giving feedback to students, how we're getting feedback from students, some questions we still have about it or things that we're thinking about, something you might do differently in the chat, or you could just go ahead and speak.
Well, I did have a question about Padlet. Is that something that's asynchronous? I mean, you can post a question and they can answer whenever.
Yes, absolutely. And it's super easy.
And the question response stays up forever, or is there a time limit or?
Yep, it can just sit there.
Okay.
I'm happy. Actually, I mean, I learned this from MSA. So I'm doing like, this is like a down the, I don't know, telephone game, but
Right.
I'm happy to meet with you and show you around on it or anything like that.
Okay, well, it's a question of just me having the time and wherewithal to do it. So I think I'll take a look at that. It seems like something that could be worthwhile. So thanks for that.
Cool. Kathy? You're muted.
I was wondering in the classes, are they, I guess the classes in terms of participation, is there a lot of content in those classes? Because sometimes I teach in the biological sciences and sometimes it's, you know, the content is so detail oriented. And so I will have a time in which I will say, okay, let's pause, let's review. And so there's always that bit about like, are there any questions? And then, you know, sometimes you'll have a very, you know, sometimes I feel like when there are a lot of students who are really, maybe they have less background, so they have more questions, are the times that I get a lot of interaction. Whereas it's basically, there's a big mix of students who come to the classes. Some of them have really good backgrounds and I have to worry about, oh, are they going to be bored versus other students who I feel like they don't have as strong a background. So they're very, very challenged. So do you have any strategies in terms of maintaining engagement when you have students with such completely different, you know, backgrounds? And I don't know at the beginning who's who. So I can't sort of like make these groups where I will sort of put together a student with a really good background with a student with a poorer background. Like, do you have any strategies so that you can sort of create really good groups so that you can sort of have students sort of like complement one another?
I don't know about the group creation, but this is something that happens a lot in intro, and I teach 120 students in one room, and there is a wide range of people picking stuff up and people not picking stuff up. And so, I'm glad you brought this up because some content doesn't lend itself to discussion as well. And so something we could do instead is say, go back to a slide and go, who can explain this in their own words to the class? And so people who feel like they have some mastery of it, being able to go, oh, I can explain this in my way, or I could, if I say, could you explain this to somebody? Let's imagine someone just walked in the room and they hadn't sat here for me. How would you teach this to them? And to have people kind of raise their hands and do that. And I guess if people feel like they can, groups could be created around that. Or we have some people feel like they are feeling comfortable and others not.
Because I feel like it makes a big difference in these lectures to make it more fun. Lectures are more fun when students are talking. So even if, you know, in that case, maybe the person who knows the information, maybe they're not learning, but I feel like it creates a more fun lecture just because it's not just me speaking, you know? So that's actually really good. I like that idea in terms of asking, like, okay, who wants to put it in their own words? And so that students can think that, you know, there are different ways of learning the information as well.
Yeah. I even do one in intro. I say, how would you explain this to your 10-year-old sibling? So different ways of knowing, of being able to make things, you know, whoever that smart person was that said, if you can't explain it to a 10-year-old, you don't know it, or whatever that is. I know I messed that up. What else though?
Richard has his hand up.
Hey, Richard.
So I think a couple of quick points. I think Jill mentioned in the chat Google Forms. I've started doing for many of my classes. I don't really like the college's feedback forms. They're sort of, they don't seem to capture an awful lot for me. So I've started doing Google Forms to have students and make time during class for them to do them, to get some feedback that way. But I don't know if any of you guys do this, but I also have my students write a letter to next year's class, where they sort of give some advice to the students. And so you're actually giving feedback to next year's students and advice, but you actually also learn a lot about how well the course has gone or how students have thought about the course. If there's too much reading, or there's too much this, there's too much that, or you're doing well in this regard or that regard. Reading between the lines with that, you can often learn a lot about sort of the course that's just obviously just gone. And it allows the students to be self-reflective as well about their own understanding of the course. So like, what did they struggle with? Having them think about their own learning over the course of the previous 14 weeks. So I think I found that useful for my future students. I've found it useful for the students, my current students, and for me in getting some sort of sense of how the class has gone, where it's strongest and weakest.
I love it. Thank you.
Okay, if nobody else speaks, I shall. At the end of, well, okay, I'm an engineer, and the courses I teach can be very technical. But the final assignment for my classes is an essay, a reflective essay, and I want to know what was the thing that surprised them, or what is the thing they learned in the class that they think they will use on their job. And this past semester, that essay was better than any class evaluations I could have got that they would have formally filled out, because so many of them said, man, I didn't know there was so much math involved in this stuff. And that was, I'm thinking, yeah, there sure is. So, but that reflective essay told me more about what they learned in the class than that satisfaction survey you have them fill out at the end, which, by the way, if you get 90%, you're doing damn good, because I'm lucky if I get 50. So
me too.
So 30% is about right. But well, there's another thing that I put together a shell for a course and worked with an educational designer, and she dropped in a survey like in week, I think it's either week 2 or 3, and then another one in week 7. And you know, I didn't appreciate them until now, because you showed that slide of our, you know, the one we asked them to do the end of the semester satisfaction, but the first 2 earlier in the semester, those are for us. And I thought, Yeah, I'm going to pay a lot more attention to those. I actually put them in the course I'm teaching this semester too, just because. But I want to see how it works. So I'm hoping they trust me enough to be honest. But we'll see.
Cool. Thank you. Jill, did you want to say something before we finish? No. Well, I can say this was, all week has been so interesting and helpful to me, and I'm so appreciative of everyone who came here today so we could like talk and hear from each other. I miss the old North Hall like adjunct room that had all the different groups of people who come in, because then it wasn't just my one department. I got to interact with so many different people, and we don't get to really do that. There's no actual physical space for that anymore. So I appreciate the TLC made this space online for this, that I get to actually see my colleagues from across the college. And so thank you for being here and talking with us. And yeah, I'm appreciating the comments too. I agree with you, Carla. I love the idea of us even just going and like watching each other and giving super informal feedback, nothing written down, nothing to go to the chair, just, and we can even ask a specific question, what do you think about how I talk? Or am I too fast? I would love that. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you for all of your suggestions too. Like I said, I learned, I missed Monday's session. I know that some of you probably went to that one, but yesterday's session was definitely helpful too. And I hope that, we were able to get information out to you, and feedback is the process, right? Whether we give it or receive it, it's whatever works for us. And thank you so much for all these ideas. I've been reading the chat and I'm loving all of the comments. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Okay, I don't know if Gina wanted to say anything, but all right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your summer. Maybe I'll see some of you guys on Faculty Development Day. Have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Everyone,
you.
keep in touch. Bye.
Bye, everyone. This was amazing.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy, for all of your comments and questions.
Thank you. Thank you. In fact, I love that idea about asking a student who knows the information to explain to somebody else. I think that's such a great, I'm going to try it. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that for those type of big sort of like background classes or foundation classes, just having that as a way to get discussion in maybe information that's not really discussion prone.
Right.
So I think I got a lot of really great.
I have to tell you too, also the same thing in the big classes and in the small ones too. I've actually started using this technique for who can explain to the class the papers we're going to have coming up, who can tell the class what the attendance policy is. And then literally I think hearing it from a voice other than mine, they're like, oh, okay. Yeah. and then they know.
Because there's so much information you have to cover. And yet I also feel like students learn well from other students because they have this ability to maybe they just explain things differently. So maybe it's not necessarily a better, but it's just a different way. And so it really just is a way to also make the class a little bit more, collegial, more casual and stuff like that. But yeah, I got so much good guidance. So thank you for this.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy you were here.
So good luck with the start of the semester, everyone.
Thank you. You too.